Let's get started.
Welcome.
Welcome, everyone.
So we're back from the summer vacation.
Oh, well, summer break, whatever you want to call it. It was a nice few sunny weeks. Well, a bit of rain in the last few, but you know, a bit of vacation. We're back with the new topic, best practices too. So we'll get right on to that. Oh, well, the agenda for today. We're gonna do a short recap of the last webinar we had from 28th July 2020. And then we're going to dive into the other, well, more or less best practices, if you will, so for the topic container runtime, monitoring, and logging. So for the recap, as a summary, for registry, I would recommend to use a central registry. It makes it much easier looking at security people that want to scan all images. It's easier if they have one registry to access and not like for every cluster there's a small one, and at best like everyone has their own registry or something. Like that's, you know, just making it hard for everybody. For user authentication, one central place again, like you have to have a central place for that, like kind of as with most bigger companies, like having a LDAP or like a, well, simply a central user management can make a lot of things easier. It's the same also for Kubernetes with like, well, kind of single sign or at least for the applications. That all is managed in one go there. As a third thing, well, service meshes, we had it, you need to be up to the task there. It's not necessarily an easy thing, depending on which service mesh you're using. And in the end, more or less, depending on what you really need, be sure to pick the right tool. Like there's no point in picking, well, something like Istio, something as big as Istio, if all you need is a bit of like, well, encryption in your cluster between your applications, for example, like to really bluntly put it like this. So, and well, for Kubernetes cluster, try to stay up to date. And well, yeah, there's simply from time to time, well, not as often, thankfully, or as with some other libraries or something around, but there's simply from time to time security issues. So it's probably sometimes worth it to just stay ahead of everything. And then you're like, yeah, there was a security issue like 10 versions back or something. But yeah, well, at least for Kubernetes, there's like in most cases a very, very fast fix for any issues. So be sure to install the latest versions and keep your cluster up to date. Let's dive into best practices 2. For the first part, container runtime. There's a bunch of container runtimes available out there. And it more or less depends on what level of isolation you need, more or less. Like you want, but you also need. Like the question for certain people would be not as necessarily if I want to do containers, but more or less if it really makes sense to use containers in that case. From a runtime perspective, from a Kubernetes runtime perspective, well, there's Docker, there's CRIO, there's a bunch of more. Like I just listed those two, I think, from my perspective, like the most common ones. Well, Containerd is also one of the more common ones, but also Kata containers and Firecracker. Kata containers, more or less in combination then with like Firecracker, for example, doesn't just, you know, like spawn like a simple like a C group, like a basic isolation based on Linux kernel, but like the Firecracker part, which is from Amazon, which it's really spawning a very, very lightweight VM, which simply offers more isolation than a simple container. Well, that's more or less things that you need to keep in mind. Like if you have applications which maybe are simply not trusted, something like this, like Kata containers with Firecracker, might be perfect for you there. Or just, as I said, like there's a bunch of other ones also like in the direction of small VM style containers out there, which offer more isolation than normal containers, like Docker. Well, and also just as a more, well, not necessarily as a reminder, but as a, hey, does it really make sense to put this into a container? I said, like with containers, normally you share everything which is on a host. Like, yes, there is isolation, but it's still simply that you have 10 applications running on the same host. I said, isolated, but even one bad sheep there could do bad things in the end. Like, well, one bad container, you know, could do bad things. So for some cases, there's simply like virtual machines, and especially for applications which are, well, harder to install and or to maintain, it might make sense to really just still go with virtual machines and have like the virtual machine synced up to like multiple data centers or something. So, well, just beware, there's a bunch of container runtimes which offer more or less features regarding isolation, security, and other aspects, and that virtual machines might also still be, or even hardware might still be a valid case for to use, especially like for something like Vault from HashiCorp. Like you have all your secrets in there. Like it's trying obviously from the application itself to not have too much unencrypted stuff in its memory at any time. But even there, especially for such a case, it makes sense to like use to use like a few bare metal machines or something which run it where it's isolated from anything else. So no. For the container runtime part, you don't really need to worry about like about your container images, because normally if you build an image, you're already in the correct format, like it's called, what are called, open container or open container image format, something like that. Simply put, there is an initiative which has standards and stuff in place to have this easily out of, like, you don't need to worry about it. So normally, as long as they're like built by Docker or the alternatives to, for example, build containers without rootless container building, all of them should provide images in the, well, default format, which you don't need to worry about anything then when you want to run them. Yeah.
Yeah, so you make the point, Alex, saying that for different use cases, there are different solutions out there. So this is what I think is something that it gets not old, and you can repeat it in different contexts. What is important here when it comes to security is to really as thinking about your use case, thinking about your business processes. What are you trying to achieve? So what are the things that you want to secure and why you want to secure them and against whom you want to secure them? So it might be the case that you really can run on normal container runtime, that it doesn't provide you that kind of very high isolation that you would have on virtual machines without you taking a lot of effort, because you can more or less kind of reach that kind of isolation what virtual machines would provide you from design. You can do that. You can tackle your container environment as far as bringing that to mostly comparable to virtual machines, meaning that trying to do the interface to the kernel and to include other tools into your environment. For example, let's say a C Linux, you have mandatory access control. You can use this in combination with AppArmor, which provides to you security on the application layer or on each application. So you can create profiles and try to isolate all of these as much as possible. But this would come with effort, and this would come, as Alex already mentioned in the recap slides, with a service mesh. So are you ready for the task? Is this something you can do? Are you understanding and what layers you are moving, and why are you using the different solutions? As sometimes they might seem that they are more or less competing to each other. This is something, for example, where I get many times asked, for example, SE Linux or AppArmor, but there is nothing against it using those solutions to complement each other and trying to get the best out of the two worlds. And you can get that. Nevertheless, it comes to the question of your business. So what are your business processes? What do you want to secure? And there you need to understand that there are different solutions out there, and each of the solution has its right to exist because it addresses maybe a specific use case, and it makes this as seamless as possible for the users. And where I like to refer is always when it comes to comparing VMs and containers, and we're speaking here to the default ones without going into the details, into hardening your container environment. You can compare those very easily. Like this is something I'd like to refer, like virtual machines. You can think about a duplex house where you share only one, let's say, kind of wall between two houses, and this wall is kind, you can think about it is the interface that you share through the kernel, and these are the system calls that both worlds are using to interact and to use the host system. While with containers, you would think about something like a kind of a hotel where you have let's say a kind of central point, which is the Linux kernel. And if you get the keys, like if you are able to corrupt the desk into that hotel, you are able to enter each and every room, where the rooms you can imagine being the different containerized applications running. And so is exactly what Alex also was saying, that then you would have the problem that one black sheep there, it will compromise your whole environment. So there are different solutions for different use cases, and I think when it comes to container runtimes, then pick and choose which is the one right for you and providing you the best features, and using different security mechanism controls on different levels, as long as they are effective. It's never bad, but you should use this as the best practice to go if possible.
Exactly. So
yeah, so when it comes to monitoring, so of course, if you are having an environment and things are being run in the environment, you want to see what's going on. So, and there is monitoring is let's say a mechanism that it enables you to take or to have an understanding what's going on within your cluster, or be this cluster-wide and even over different clusters, depending how you implement your monitoring solution. Nevertheless, when it comes to monitoring, what is important here as what is the goal of you monitoring? Is the goal of making sure that the services are running, making sure that there is no issues into your cluster, and maybe even trying to detect anomalies or unusual behavior that might be on different levels. It might be on the node level, it might be on the cluster level, or it might be on the container level, at the application level. So this is actually why you are using monitoring. And when we come to the goal of security, because if you want to make security understandable, you start by the goals. So what goals is security trying to achieve and to reach? And one of them is, for example, availability, so that services are available at the time where legitimate users want to use them and want to make use of the services that are available to them. So and that's why monitoring is very important. You need to monitor, but this is not enough for sure. You have also to think about, when it comes to availability, you need to think that this monitoring solutions, the way you implemented it, it should take availability also in consideration, because imagine you running a cluster and your monitoring solution, it's not available anymore because it can break. I mean, we're talking about technology. We know that there bugs exist and they can arise and they can come into being from one day to the other. So 0-day attacks and so on and so forth. So then you are blind when it comes to your environment. And what is important here also to mention is when you implement your monitoring solution, which there are many out there, you also need to think about monitoring. We are addressing the availability topic here. So this is something that you should keep in mind, implementing that as highly available service. Nevertheless, you also need to think about confidentiality, which is another goal that security is addressing, or it consists when we talk about security information technology. And there, when you monitor, you can think about that a lot of information is being sent to your monitoring service. A lot of information about your environment. And we know that from design, the first thing a hacker or someone that has, let's say, malicious intentions that wants to break something or wants to compromise something, the first step into doing this is to gather information. All right, so this is like the first step you do, be this on the digital world or be this on the physical world. The first thing you do is gather information. And well, if you have a monitoring solution that well, it doesn't somehow think about confidentiality, making sure that the information gathered from the system to the central monitoring or to the distributed monitoring services that you might have running, which need, of course, to be then synchronized. If this information can be wiretapped, let's say, for instance, right? So someone at the network can listen and can make sense of it. The person is able to gather so much information about the environment, to know what kind of services you're running, what kind of versions, what is going on into the system, who is trying to access what service, and so on and so forth. So depending also on the metrics that you are gathering, for sure. But when you're gathering matrices, so this should be kept in mind. And well, there are monitoring solutions out there which can help you do that, but they don't address all of these requirements, right? So maybe Alex can say something about Prometheus. It provides you some security in there, but you still can reach the endpoints via HTTP, gathering the information. So maybe you cannot, let's say, change that information in some sense, but you can still gather the information from the endpoints if you have access to the monitoring endpoints.
Yeah. Well, for Prometheus, it more or less depends. Like you would probably just go ahead and set up a second part your application will listen on to solve the metrics, for example, then instead of like on the main web part. But yeah, it's more or less the point. Like there, you can have SSL, like you can have HTTPS by like running at an exporter, but well, I don't think like there's not too many people doing it. Maybe besides on their like actual application on like smaller exporters. On the smaller exporters, I think the biggest amount of work put there is maybe like looking at Kubernetes, the node exporter, having like a kube RBAC proxy in front. So there is at least like authorization that the request is authorized to even get the data, but yeah. No, like there's no HTTPS or so involved there. But yeah, so
sure,
more or less depends.
Yeah, you can still have like the two parts. Let's say you need to think about it because this is the first step someone would do, trying to gather information about your system. And even if it's an insider, so if it's an employee working at your company that maybe has legitimate access to the services because you haven't done, let's say, your separation of duties or least privilege or need to know very carefully, or you are trying to do those, or you are in the way of implementing them, you still need to think about this kind of mechanisms as the airbag, trying maybe at least to authorize the users before they get to the information, before they get the information, even though then after the user has been authorized, the information is sent not confidentially via the network, so you still have the risk anyone wiretaping and listening to that network connection can still get the data. Nevertheless, using SSL, it's probably the secure way, and of course, still having the authorization in between, because you can imagine having encrypted data from one side to the other without any authorization would mean still the same. So you need both mechanisms there if you really want to secure your cluster from a kind of monitoring perspective. And especially when it comes to monitoring, it's always good to think about it like someone needs to act on the monitoring, right? You have some alerts you can configure, but someone needs to act on it. And this is something that maybe you would like also to try to not only detect, because when we talk about monitoring in security, we are talking about kind of detection mechanism. So we are detecting, trying to identify if something is going wrong or if something is working as it should work, and then identifying if this is not the case anymore. Nevertheless, you also could think here at this point in time also about prevention mechanism, trying to use different tools to prevent maybe stuff instead of only detecting. Yeah.
Exactly. No. Let's go to the next point, I would say.
Yep, sure.
Which is logging.
Yeah, so here I was just borrowing more or less from the Kubernetes website, the different kind of way how you can implement logging, and you can implement this on different levels. You can implement this as sidecar on your application. You can implement this at the node level. You can implement this as a container which has a streaming agent as a sidecar at the container. So that there are different ways how you can implement logging. Well, here I put it in kind of on red, so at least on the first solution, which more or less it contains the other ones in an abstract way. You have to think when it comes to, and in the logging we wanted to talk about integrity. So in integrity, it's like the feature you can use, so you are able to at least detect if something has been modified without the right to do so. So it has been actually modified by people that are not legitimate to execute those modifications, and where they can happen. So they can happen, of course, in the log file, where can be, let's say, on your cluster, or it can be on the node. So it doesn't matter. So you have a log file where you're appending your logs, and the first thing that someone compromising a system would try to do, they would try to do and to hide their footstep. So the first thing they would go into your logging, where your logging data is being gathered, and they would try to, well, at least assuming that they have now the rights to do so, because they have compromised the system, they would try to delete the entries, and so that it wouldn't be any more possible to understand what went wrong into your cluster, what action has been actually executed within your environment. And so this is something you have to think about it. And more or less, when you have a logging backend, which is again another, it's a good idea having a backend where you gather your logging. You don't have this only local on your environment, but maybe you have a centralized offsite kind of logging backend where you transport the data, where you have them, let's say, as two separate copies of each other. This is again showing that this needs also to be introduced there, because assuming something goes wrong within the environment, you can still make sense of what went wrong if this data has been at least transmitted or has been at this time so far copied, or maybe not every at the last step, but maybe at the 2 or 3 last steps. Especially when it comes also, if you think about it, most of the companies try to, or not try, but they are mainly have to fulfill security requirements and or auditing requirements, and they are going to be audited by auditors, that they need to make sure that their services fulfill a certain security level or certain security requirements. And at this point in time, you also need, for internal purposes, you might have someone having a look at these logs like manually, which it's probably impossible that nowadays, but assuming that you are using the correct tools and you having your experts there looking at these logs and trying to make sense or identifying with the help of these tools if something is unusual. This would help, of course, if they have still access to these logs afterwards, so they can still replay these logs into the tools and try maybe to identify patterns. If the logs were gone and they are not integrity secured, then you are not able to do any forensics analysis afterwards, like post-mortem analysis, and get lessons learned. So it's always about also getting lessons learned and trying to understand. I mean, we are whole humans, we know technology is made by us, so it's gonna be someday it's gonna fail, there are gonna be mistakes there, be those intentionally or unintentionally. So the one of, again, it might sound a little bit too broad, but again, it's also very old, so you need more or less to learn from the mistakes of every day. So what you did, so these mistakes are going to be made. And one thing is how you can learn about your mistakes or what has been done wrong if you have no, let's say, footprint anymore. So if you have no trace what went wrong, so to learn from it and to think about it, okay, so how can we improve the situation from where we got? So maybe our control mechanisms weren't that effective as we thought. Or they have been, let's say, circumvented by a kind of new attack or a kind of something that we have not foreseen, a different path that we have just forgotten in our security analysis. And this can happen. I mean, these systems are very complex, and you can just oversee this. So this is something that you need to think about, that integrity, very important in logging, and of course availability. Sure, you mentioned that you want to have those data available in sense of auditing or forensic.
Yeah, so it's not just about, well, making sure that the log files can be modified, but well, they should be shipped somewhere. Like, don't just keep them on a note, put them somewhere safe, centrally. You can with ease, central place, check if something's going on, which should not. Well, that was it already from our side. The next webinar will be in 2 weeks. The topic will be announced, and well, we'll hopefully see you there, and have a good day.
Yep, so are there any questions?
Oh,
there aren't any questions. So, okay, so there aren't any questions. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I totally missed my Zoom question panel here. That disappeared. If you have any questions, there should be a Q&A functionality.
Yeah, there is. If there are any specific questions to the topics or something that you think is important from your perspective, something that you also want to share, what is your opinion on that? Any challenge that you have and you want to discuss, just feel free. Let's wait maybe 1 or 2 more minutes to see if anyone wants to join the conversation and wants to throw some thoughts in here. Well, it doesn't seem so. So we have no questions. So yeah, thank you from my side for your attention. Thank you, Alex. And yeah, see you in 2 weeks' time then. Have a great day.